While it's fair to say most of us here do love the Dark Angels because I harp on about them all the time, but there is another faction that I've noticed always does get a lot of attention whenever it is mentioned or discussed on the channel, and that is the friendly rivals of the Dark Angels, the Space Wolves. And so today, I thought we would dive into their index and go through their datasheets to see just what is what in the lands of Fenris. They are most certainly getting a Codex sometime this year in 2025, but still I think this is going to be quite fun to do and should hopefully prove at least a little bit useful for anyone that is thinking about joining the Sons of Russ in 10th edition. And so, much like the Dark Angels, you get the generic Marine Army rule Oath of Moment, letting you pick an enemy unit in your command phase and then you get full rerolls to hit against it, so giving you a huge damage increase at both range and melee, and with some of the easy access the Wolves have to things like lethal or sustained hits, you can massively utilize this to fish for more sixes and get the most out of some of your key units, so it is actually a very, very strong buff for the Wolves. Of course, you don't get the +1 to wound if you are taking any Space Wolves units in your army, but I do think for the Wolves in particular, you do have quite a lot of very good Wolf keyworded units, so it's definitely not that much of a feels bad, and you will, more likely than not, be happy bringing those unique units, even if you know you are giving up that +1 to wound. The Wolves have got 2 detachments now, and we'll go through both of them here as we haven't done a Grotmus video for the Space Wolves, but first up is the Index one, which is the Champions of Russ. There is also a small set of restrictions like the other main Marine chapters, which limit what you can bring in a Wolves list, so as Space Wolves, you can't include any tactical or assault squads, no assault squads with jump packs, no Devastator or Command squads, and no Apothecaries. And that is essentially because you have your own Wolfy version of those units. And the main rule for the Champions of Russ detachment is the Deeds Worthy of Saga, and these are a really cool and flexible set of rules. You can, at the start of the first battle round, pick a saga for your army, and there are 4 options in total, but only 3 of them are available to be picked right from the get-go, but you then get a series of benefits based on the one you've chosen. You can then also, at the end of any player's turn, choose another saga from the list, and if you've completed a specific task associated with that saga, then the buffs from that saga also unlock for your army for the battle. So you can, by the end of the game, have all 4 of these up and running, which does give you some monumentally powerful benefits in your games. The options are the Saga of the Warriorborn, which is completed if a character model from your army kills an enemy character model, and that unlocks sustained hits 1 for all your melee weapons. Saga of the Bear requires a character from your army to be reduced below half strength in a turn, but not be destroyed, and completing that unlocks a 6-up Feel No Pain for your entire army. The Saga of the Beast Slayer is completed when a character from your army destroys a monster or a vehicle, and that one unlocks army-wide lethal hits on your melee weapons. And then finally, the Saga of Majesty. This is the one you can't choose to be automatically completed at the start of the game. This one is completed if you control 1 or more objective markers in your opponent's deployment at the end of the turn, and you have a character in range of it, and this one gets you +1 to the OC for all of your units. So there are some very powerful buffs here. Being able to get lethal or sustained hits or a 6-up Feel No Pain up and running automatically from turn 1 is super strong, but they are all very doable over the course of a game, so it really isn't unlikely that you can get at least 2 or 3 of these on all of your units by the end of the battle. And let me tell you from experience, a lot of your units with both lethal and sustained hits into an Oath of Moment target, they will pretty much just massacre anything they touch. So it's a very strong detachment rule, and it is very much one that you will enjoy leaning into if you are bringing the Wolves and like their idea of achieving epic deeds and sagas. To better support these as well, you do get some really good enhancements with the Champions of Russ. The Pelt of Beowulf is up first. This one costs you 10 points, and it grants you the ability to force a battle shock test on all enemy units in engagement range of the bearer at the start of the fight phase. So no -1 to the roll or anything, but for just 10 points, this can be okay if you just want to try and deny some stratagems on a few enemy units that you're fighting. The Wolftail Talisman is up next. This is pricier at 20 points, and this one gives the bearer -1 damage against incoming attacks. So on something like a tankier character, like an HQ on a Thunderwolf or a Terminator Lord or something, this can make them a lot more difficult to put down. It is definitely a good buff to have, and a reasonable third pick of enhancement in my opinion. But to me, the next two options are just even better still. Black Death is just fantastic. For 25 points, you get Anti-Monster 4+, and Anti-Vehicle 4+ on the bearer's melee weapons, so putting this on a Lord with a Thunder Hammer can be getting you dev wounds on a 4+ into those targets, which is just brutal. Alongside something like sustained hits, you really can do a lot of work from some of your characters into those tougher targets with that loadout. And then finally, the Frost Weapon is cheaper at 15 points, but this again boosts your melee. It gives the bearer's weapon the precision rule and also boosts their strength and AP by 1, so it makes your heroes that much better at going into enemy characters hiding inside squads, and also making it much more likely that you will be wounding them on 3s rather than 4s, for instance, and potentially pushing them to an invulnerable save rather than just using their armor save. So it is great on another unit that you are going to want to be throwing into combat and just getting the absolute most out of them. So 3 really, really good enhancements. 2 of them I think you will be trying to fit in almost every game. But then of course, if you do want that third one, I do think the Wolftail Talisman is a very valid third pick. But then of course, on top of that, you do get the standard 6 stratagems to further boost your output. And there is some real power in these as well. We of course won't go into Armor of Contempt because that is still the same. It's still very good, but less so now as it doesn't cover the whole phase, just one set of attacks, but still very, very handy for keeping a unit alive against some particularly scary incoming damage. Runic Wards is done in the opponent's shooting phase after the enemy has selected targets. You can pick a unit that was chosen and they get a 5-up Feel No Pain against psychic and mortal damage. So some pretty good defense against those kind of attacks. But also, if the Saga of the Bear has been completed, this goes to a 4-up Feel No Pain. So depending on what Saga you choose at the start of the game or what you've completed, this can give you some really powerful defense against certain armies. Go for the Throat is in the fight phase. This one allows a unit from your army to get +1 to their AP, but if you've completed the Saga of the Beast Slayer, you also get Lance. So Beast Slayer giving you Lance when you've completed it means that if you charge in, you could have a unit that is +1 AP, Lance, and lethal hits. So you are going to be amazing at going into those tougher targets and any vehicles that are standing in your way. I mean, Lance and lethal hits don't combo super well together, but still, it is going to be a huge net boost to your damage output. Death Howl is up next. This is again in the fight phase, and a unit of yours can be the target if it has destroyed an enemy unit this phase. They can move up to 6 inches when they consolidate instead of 3. If the Saga of Majesty is completed, then after you consolidate, every enemy within 6 inches of your unit has to test Battle Shock, which is a sweet little extra, but to me, just the base ability of being able to consolidate 6 inches is where the real power lies. This can be devastating on something like Murderfang, who can potentially fight multiple times in a single combat phase, so being able to just move that extra distance to grab or go into another enemy unit is really, really powerful. Warrior Pride is done in the command phase. This one lets you pick a saga that hasn't been completed, and you pick a character model from your army, and models in their unit get the benefit of the saga as if it had been. So if you think you are going to need lethal hits but didn't go for that saga at the start of the game, or you want that one turn of Feel No Pain, you can just proc that effect on demand. So for 1 command point, making your detachment ability even more flexible than it was before is just really good, and I do think this one will get quite a lot of use. The final stratagem is Relentless Assault. These are all 1 CP by the way, and this one is very, very good for that cost. In your movement phase, you can pick a unit and it can still shoot even if it has advanced or fallen back, which is okay, don't get me wrong, but the big benefit of this one is that if the Saga of the Warriorborn is completed, then the unit you pick can charge after advancing or falling back, so potentially unlocking a very scary turn 1 charge with a fast unit like Thunderwolves. And this is why a lot of people go for the Warriorborn as their first unlocked Saga, because the combo of getting that turn 1 advance and charge is just so powerful. You also got the Champions of Fenris detachment in the Grotmus releases. This one comes with the rule The Great Wolf Watches. It doesn't give you the flexibility of buffs from the sagas, instead giving you the option to do some sneaky countercharge mechanics. The rule allows you at the end of the enemy charge phase to pick an infantry or walker unit from your army that's within 3 inches of an enemy unit, and that would be eligible to charge, and they can then declare a charge against one of those enemy units. Now, they don't get any charge bonuses, so no fights first, for instance, but this can be a very nasty, sneaky trick to play on the enemy, making it almost impossible for them to just very subtly go in and steal an objective from you, because it means that getting anywhere close to you means that you can pretty much just heroically intervene into them for free. And on the face of it, it may be less flashy than the sagas, but in terms of denying objectives to your opponent, it can be even more powerful, I think. You also get a smaller benefit of +1 OC to your Terminator units when they're not battle shocked, so it really is just all about playing around the idea of objectives and getting you the absolute most utility when it comes to scoring and just playing the game. So it's definitely less of a pure output bonus, but I do think in some cases it can be more impactful. I would say in general, I do like it a bit less than the sagas, just because I think the sagas are a bit more fun and straightforwardly powerful. But yeah, I do think if you play this detachment right, it can make it an absolute nightmare for your opponent to deal with. The 4 enhancements you get from this detachment help to get even more utility from the main rule. And starting off, you have Wolf's Wisdom. This is relatively pricey at 30 points, but it enables you to make that charge ability from your detachment rule at 6 inches rather than 3, so doubling the threat range you can start to put onto the enemy, and this one is incredibly strong. It's going to make it pretty much impossible for the enemy to get anywhere near your lines and objectives without getting one of your units thrown into them. It is infantry only, so it's no use on things like Thunderwolves, but getting a unit of Terminators or Blade Guard veterans with a character with this into the opponent from 6 inches away can just be devastatingly good. Foe's Fate is cheaper at 15 points. This is on a Terminator model only. This one allows the bearer to force a desperate escape test on an enemy that is trying to fall back from engagement range from the bearer's unit, and it is at -1 if the enemy is battle shocked, so potentially punishing the enemy falling back, which can be a fairly nasty way to kind of incentivize them to not fall back and keep them locked up. You know, you can kill a fair few enemy models if they do want to try and risk that desperate escape test. The other 15-point option is the Fang Rune Pendant. This is also a Terminator model, and this one just allows the bearer and his unit to fall back and still shoot and charge. So instead of locking up the enemy like you can in Foe's Fate, this just gives you a bit more utility. You can fall back and then still shoot and then charge back in if that's your preference, or charge into another combat if you want to go into another unit. I would say overall, the Fang Rune Pendant is probably the better pick overall because it gives you more flexibility rather than lessening the flexibility of your opponent, so you can decide what you want to do with it. So it just gives you that bit more power, I think. Finally, the 20-point Longstrider is your last option. This one allows you to re-roll charge rolls for the bearer and his unit. It's a bit expensive for 20 points, I think. It's not a bad buff to have by any stretch. Rerolling charges is very good, and I do think in this detachment it will come in handy, but I just can't help but feel it's more of a 15-point enhancement rather than a full 20, so you could get some use out of this, but I just think it's a bit pricey for what it brings. They're overall okay enhancements. Wolf's Wisdom is easily the best, and it is pretty much an auto pick for me, and I would also be considering the Fang Rune Pendant a lot of the time, but the other two, they're okay, but I don't think they are must-takes by any stretch of the imagination. Naturally, the usual 6 stratagems make an appearance, and naturally we will ignore Armor of Contempt. We begin with Prey Taker's Eye. This is 1 command point, like all of these strats are, and in the shooting or fight phase, this allows an infantry unit in your army to have either lethal or sustained hits. So somewhat replicating the Saga abilities, just getting you that bit more output on your units and being able to select which is going to be best depending on whether you are fighting a vehicle or a monster or some infantry is just a really handy use of one command point. Chilling Howl is done in the enemy command phase. This one allows you to pick a Terminator unit from your army and it forces each enemy unit within 6 inches of them to test Battle Shock at -1. So this is really great for helping you to disrupt the enemy command phase. The fact that it is done in the enemy command phase is potentially a really nasty surprise for them, and being at -1 makes it that much more likely to go off. So this can be a really good way to just ruin your enemy's plans before the game or before their turn even gets underway. Stalking Wolves grants an infantry unit of yours the stealth ability in the enemy shooting phase after they're selected as targets, so just giving you that extra bit of protection as you are rushing up the board. It can make things like your Terminators much more durable against enemy shooting, so it's a great defensive stratagem to have, and again, one that I think you will be using quite often if you are running a lot of infantry in your army. Next up, we have the Runes of Claiming. This is a strat done at the end of your command phase, and it lets an infantry or walker unit essentially just sticky an objective it's on. It's that ever useful ability that will just help you to keep playing the objective game and scoring points even as you are moving up your army towards the enemy. So it is just super, super handy. And again, if you want to win the game, you need to control objectives and be scoring points, and this just helps you do that a little bit more easily. Finally, you also get Onrushing Storm. This is done at the end of the enemy fight phase, and it impacts a Terminator unit from your army, and it lets you do some uppy-downy tricks. If the unit isn't within engagement range of an enemy, they can be put into strategic reserves, so you can bring them back on in your following movement phase. And being a Terminator unit, obviously they have deep strike, so you can get them really wherever you need them on the board. Now, what's interesting about this is that the keyword that it uses is Terminator Squad Unit, not Terminator Unit, like the earlier rules. And rules as written, that means this can only be put onto a regular Astartes Terminator Squad, not things like your Wolf Guard. So if that is the case and this doesn't get FAQ'd, then it's a lot less good. It is still a very good trick to have, but obviously you want to be using it on your specific unit like the Wolf Guard, not just only on the regular Astartes Terminators. Now we are onto the units themselves though, and we will start with the big man, Logan Grimnar. He's 115 points, so he can be fairly nicely compared to someone like Azrael. He's toughness 5 with a 2-up save, 6 wounds and a 5-inch move. He does of course have that 4-up invuln as you would expect, and he is rather more killy than Azrael. He's only got a Stormbolter for ranged, but in melee, his axe Morkai can either swing for 10 strength 6, -2 AP, 1 damage attacks, or 6 strength 8, -2 AP, 3 damage attacks. So he can be very good at killing off either chaff or screens, or tougher things like Terminators. He's not actually quite so great into 2 wound things like Marines, thanks to the profile being either 1 or 3 damage, but even by himself, he will wipe out a couple of Terminators, so he definitely isn't shabby. He also brings, of course, a couple of unique rules. The Great Wolf grants you a bonus command point whenever this model destroys an enemy unit, and then High King of Fenris brings a huge once per battle ability. It allows you, in the charge phase, to re-roll charge rolls for all your units army-wide, and then in combat, your units also get to re-roll their hit rolls. So what this brings you is, potentially for one turn, army-wide re-roll charges and army-wide re-roll hit rolls. So this can be a huge force multiplier, and even though it's only once per game, if you have a few units that you want to charge in and get into melee, this can absolutely swing an entire battle in your favor. So he really does have a lot of potential, I think. Just being able to join a few units of Terminators and that kind of thing, that gives him a really resilient little bodyguard. So he can just drop in. He's pretty killy by himself, but that one big buff he brings, using that at the right time, can just make him so worth his cost. He can instead take his sled, which is called Stormrider. This is 180 points, and he gains 5 inches of movement going up to 10, and also gets a bump up to toughness 6 and a much better 12 wounds. So he is much more resilient than he was before. He does largely keep the same profile in terms of his weapons and rules, but he gains 6 attacks from the wolves' claws and teeth that are pulling his sled, and they are 6 strength 5, -1 AP, 1 damage extra attacks. Of course, he can no longer join Terminator units, but instead he gets the option to go alongside some Thunderwolves now, which can be really good. And essentially, for 65 points, you get 6 extra attacks from the Wolves, a good bit of extra movement and durability, and if you wanted to go heavy on the Thunderwolves rather than Terminators, this could be a very good pick. He does actually combo really well with Thunderwolves because, as we will see a bit later, they get +1 damage on the turn they've charged, so it gets not only your Wolves' claws and teeth to 2 damage, but also the Axe Morkai can go up to 4 damage when he swings after he's charged in. Njal Stormcaller is up next. He is a Rune Priest, so he brings some Psychic shenanigans. For just 85 points, you get a Toughness 5, 2-up save, 4-up invuln profile with 5 wounds. He can join the same set of Terminator units as Logan can, and he brings actually some fairly decent defensive bonuses to his unit. He not only grants them stealth with his Stormcaller ability to make those Terminator models even more difficult to shift, but then if the enemy tries to use psychic attacks to deal with them, then his runic armor protects his unit by making them -1 to wound against those attacks. So certain armies with a lot of psychic output will really struggle to get through that combo of -1 to hit and potentially -1 to wound before they even get to the 2-up saves and 4-up invulns that Terminators have. His own output is only mediocre though, really, which is a shame. Living Lightning can be throwing out D6, Strength 7, -1 AP, 1 damage shots with sustained hits 2, or you can focus it to get up to 2d6 shots, but you do risk those hazardous rolls. And then in combat, his Staff of the Stormcaller, that is 4 attacks at the same Strength 7 and -1 AP, but it now does D3 damage. And with sustained hits too, he can actually do okay into some smaller units. He does add some vaguely decent output to a unit of Terminators that he is strolling around with. Next up, we have the oldest of the old. Bjorn the Fell-Handed is a very welcome presence in most Space Wolves lists. Whether he sticks around in the eventual Codex updates, we'll have to wait and see, but for now, he is still here. He comes in at 190 points, and he has a typical old Dreadnought stat line of Toughness 9, 8 wounds, a 2-up save, and a fairly solid 8-inch move. He actually doesn't have an invulnerable save, but he does get some added protection from a 5-up Feel No Pain instead, so he can be fairly tanky, and as we will see in just a second, he can take a lot of effort to get rid of. He's got a good selection of weapons, being able to take the standard Assault Cannon, Heavy Plasma Cannon, Twin Las Cannon, Multi-Melter, or he can take a Hellfrost Cannon in addition to his melee weapon, which is True Claw. Now, I think the Hellfrost is actually a good all-round pick. It gives you a fairly scary Strength 9, -3 AP, flat 5 damage shot at 36 inches, or a Flamer-esque 12-inch torrent attack, which is Strength 6, -1 AP and 2 damage. But I mean, equally, the Twin Las Cannon can get you a tiny bit more anti-tank if you want that higher Strength 12. His main output comes in melee though. True Claw is 6 Strength 12, -2 AP, 3 damage swings with lethal hits. So hitting on 2s, he's going to be doing a good bit of work into most things, and he is really pretty great into almost anything from Terminators all the way up to tougher vehicles, and even knights he can do some okay damage into. His durability, as I mentioned just before, is boosted even further though with one of his rules, Legendary Tenacity. This just flat out halves incoming damage. So despite having no invulnerable save, it is going to take a lot to put him down. Even things like Imperial Knights with their flat 6 damage chainswords will only be doing 3 damage into him, so backed up by that 5-up Feel No Pain, he can take a lot more hits and is a lot more sturdy than you may initially think. His other datasheet ability is still showing as Ancient Tactician on the index, but as of the latest data slate, that has been changed to Lord of Deceit. This is an aura now, where if an enemy uses a stratagem on a unit within 12 inches of Bjorn, they have to increase the cost of it by 1. So giving him a huge threat range where you can make it much more difficult for your opponent to use some defensive stratagems or use some offensive stratagems. Even things like an interrupt is going to be wildly expensive now if they want to use it around Bjorn. So this is really good. It is, as I said, an absolutely massive aura where you can put Bjorn down and just utterly ruin your opponent's command point economy. If you want to bring a more Captain America vibe to your army, then next up we have Arjac Rockfist. He's sort of a lieutenant character, being able to join the same unit of Terminators as a captain or chapter master, and for 95 points, you get a toughness 5, 2-up save, 4-up Invuln Terminator profile with 6 wounds. He's got the Foe Hammer, which is his ranged and melee weapon, which is either 5 strength 8, -2 AP, 3 damage swings with anti-monster 2+ in melee, or you can just flat out throw the hammer 6 inches for the same profile, but only 1 shot. So he can actually do quite a lot of work into enemy monsters before his unit even charges in, and then he also gives his unit +1 to the hit roll if they're below starting strength, and +1 to wound if they're below half strength. So as you take casualties, he can make a unit of Terminators really quite terrifying in combat. Finally, his Champion of the Kingsguard rule allows him to use the Epic Challenge stratagem for 0 CP, so giving him some precision on his attacks, and also he gets to re-roll hit and wound rolls against characters. This is just him, not his unit, but it makes him very capable of taking out enemy HQs when he's in combat with them. He's got a very good chance, over 70%, of just one-shotting a Custodes Shield Captain in a unit, so anything less than that, he can pretty much almost guarantee he is just going to squish it in combat. The gorgeous Ulrik the Slayer is up next. He's got a, I want to say reasonably new model, but I think it was 7th edition he came out, so it's actually not that new, but compared to some stuff, it is relatively new. It isn't Primaris though, so he may get an even newer one sometime this year with the Codex, who knows? But for 70 points, he is a Wolf Priest, so he brings you some Chaplain-style buffs to your army. He's toughness 4 with 4 wounds and a 3-up save, so he isn't super durable, although he does have the standard 4-up Invuln like all Chaplains do, and also a token 6-up Feel No Pain, which could help in a pinch, and he can join the Wolf-specific units of Bloodclaws, Grey Hunters, Longfangs, or Wolfguard. He's got some fairly standard output for himself. He's got a plasma pistol, which is okay, and then a slightly improved Artificer Crozius, which is -2 AP instead of just -1, so it's not a big difference, but it is a tiny bit better. And then he comes with 2 rules. The Wolf Helm of Russ is an aura of 6 inches that bumps friendly Astartes leadership up to 5+, so making you a bit more reliable when you do have to take any battle shock or other leadership tests. And then his main ability is the Slayer's Oath, and this allows you to pick an enemy unit in the fight phase that he is in engagement range of, and you can re-roll hit and wound rolls of 1 into them. And if the enemy unit is a monster, a vehicle, or a character unit, it is full re-rolls. So joining him to a unit of Bloodclaws, for instance, can get you a huge number of attacks, up to 60 in some cases, re-rolling everything into those tougher targets, so it really can improve your output quite significantly and make even something that is a generally weaker chip damage style unit like the Bloodclaws actually a credible threat into even tougher things like tanks and bigger monsters. The first of the wolves to get the Primaris treatment after cutting off Ghazghkull Thraka's head was of course Ragnar Blackmane, and he came out with a frankly disgusting melee profile, and that has actually largely stuck with him in 10th edition. Ragnar is very cheap at 90 points, and he gets you a standard toughness 4 3-up save profile with a 4-up Invuln and 5 wounds. He can join the usual wolf units of Bloodclaws, Wolfguard, Grey Hunters, but also the Primaris units of Bladeguard veterans and both regular and assault intercessors, so he does have some good options for a bodyguard unit. Warhowl is an ability that lets him and his unit advance and charge, which is an incredibly good buff on a melee focused unit like his, and also when they do charge, Ragnar gets +2 to his strength and attacks. So again, this isn't on his unit, but it makes him very, very scary indeed with his weapon Frostfang. Frostfang is 8 attacks that hit on 2s. They are strength 6, -3 AP and 2 damage with sustained hits. So it's already a fairly solid little marine killer, but with his Battle Lust rule boosting that, he can go up to 10 strength 8 attacks instead. And with those bonus hits on 6s, he can easily get rid of 7 or 8 2-wound marine bodies by himself. So he is just an absolute blender into almost anything. And that's before his unit even gets to swing. So he is very, very scary. He's arguably a little bit squishy, but getting an important unit advance and charge and then being able to pretty much wipe out a unit by himself anyway for 90 points is just insanely good output. You also get access, for now anyway, to a few older classic units. Krom Dragongaze is a brilliant little model that I think came out with a box with some Tyranids back in 6th or 7th edition. Krom is 65 points, he is a captain, he's toughness 4 with 4 wounds, a 3-up save, a 4-up invuln, and he's got a similar, albeit not quite as good, melee profile as Ragnar. Wormclaw is his axe, and it's got 6 attacks at strength 7, minus 2 AP and 2 damage, and it has lethal hits, so he is a bit better into some of those tougher targets where those lethal hits can come into play. He obviously won't do as much damage as Ragnar, who is far killier, but he can still do alright. He'll kill off a few marines when he's charged in with a unit of Bloodclaws or Wolfguard, for instance, and he also gets to buff his unit with the refuse to accept defeat rule, which gives him and his unit +1 to hit if they are below starting strength, and +1 to wound if they're below half. So kind of like Arjac, he can make your unit still put out a good bit of damage even as it's being whittled down. And then finally, he can also do some cheeky battle shock tricks with his Fierce Eye. That can force a test on an enemy infantry unit within 12 inches in the shooting phase. So it's not exactly reliable, sometimes it won't do anything, but this can potentially debuff a unit a little bit before you charge into them. Moving on to a few Thunderwolf heroes now. Harald Deathwolf is another relatively cheap character. He comes in at a mere 85 points, which for a 10-inch move, toughness 6, 7 wound, and a 3-up save with a 4-up invuln HQ is actually pretty damn cheap. His Thunderwolf Icetooth has the teeth and claws, which give him 3 strength 5, minus 1 AP, 1 damage attacks on top of Harald's, and Harald's are with his axe Glacius, which are 6 attacks at strength 6, minus 2 AP, and 2 damage. So he's got a reasonably decent melee profile, but he brings a really niche but quite tasty buff to a unit of Thunderwolves that he joins. Lord of the Wolfkin means that after they have charged, a unit he is with gets devastating wounds on their wolves' teeth and claws. So all those extra attacks will now potentially just be going through any armor or invuln saves that your opponent may have, which is really quite good. He also gets a bit of a durability boost from his Mantle of the Troll King that allows him to change the damage from an incoming attack to 0, and he can do this once per phase, so he can actually be really quite tanky. Dropping a big, scary, hard-hitting attack down to 0 in each phase means that you will get to use this a lot if the enemy has a lot of precision attacks, or if he is just off on his own after his unit's been destroyed. He can actually last a good bit longer than you might think. An alternative option is Canis Wolfborn. He's a cheaper 75 points. There is no invuln on Canis, but the same 10-inch move, toughness 6, although only 6 wounds for him. He also has 3 extra attacks from the teeth and claws of his wolf, but his own weapon is his wolf claws, and that brings him 8 strength 5, minus 2 AP, 1 damage attacks that are twin linked. So they're actually very, very good for chewing through chaff and screens, but with the rerolls to wound, he can actually still do reasonably well into tougher targets as well, just through the sheer weight of dice. He can hilariously join Fenrisian Wolves if you wanted a really cheap unit to give him some extra ablative wounds, but he is of course very good with Thunderwolves too, granting the unit he joins sustained hits 1, which is brilliant thanks to his Born of Wolves ability, and then Alpha Predator nets you some impact hits. You get to roll a d6 after his unit has charged, and on a 2 to 3, the enemy unit takes d3 mortals, they take a flat 3 mortals on a 4 to 5, and then d3 plus 3 mortals on a 6. So he can do quite a lot of damage to the enemy before combat even begins, and then of course he and Harald are both very, very good in a unit of Thunderwolves. Their biggest competition, funnily enough, comes from the fact that the non-named version of Thunderwolf HQs are arguably just even better still and more customizable. But before we get to them, the regular Wolfguard battle leader in Terminator armor is next on our list. This guy is a lieutenant equivalent, so can join a captain or chapter master in a squad, and he can join the standard Terminator units. But for 75 points, you get a toughness 5, 5 wound model with a 2-up save, 4-up invuln of a Terminator, a great selection of weapon options as well, and he brings the lethal hits rule to his units with tactical precision. On top of that, as Huskarl to the Njal, he gives all character models in his unit a 4-up Feel No Pain. So if you put him and a captain, or say Logan Grimnar, in the same unit, both the battle leader and the other character will get that incredibly strong 4-up Feel No Pain, so keeping them really safe from enemy precision attacks. He comes with a Stormbolter and a power weapon base, but as I said, he can take a good mixture of weapons with a combi weapon for range, and then a selection of melee choices, power fists, thunder hammers, twin lightning claws, even a chain fist, so he does have a great selection to help his unit in whatever way you think they need it the most. He is arguably a little bit pricey at 75 points, but bringing those lethal hits to his unit is really, really good. And I mean, his own output isn't nothing. An extra 4 Thunderhammer attacks with lethal hits is certainly going to be a big boost to any unit he joins. Now, however, we come to the 2 Thunderwolf HQs, the Wolf Lord and the Battle Leader. The Wolf Lord is 100 points, so he is pricier than Harald, but similar with the 10-inch move, toughness 6, 3-up save, and 4-up invuln. He does only have 6 wounds base, but obviously he has the option to take enhancements, and he has a more varied loadout, which does, in my opinion, make him a bit better. He can take a Storm Shield anyway to get him to 7 wounds, and then he has a choice of relic weapons, thunder hammers, power fists, and that sort of thing. Generally, though, the go-to loadout is a Thunderhammer Storm Shield, which nets him some great output and that extra wound. Like most captains, he's got the really great ability of Rites of Battle, meaning once per battle round, you can reduce the CP cost of a stratagem on a unit by 1, so potentially netting you a free or at least a cheaper stratagem each battle round. And then he also brings you Speed of the Hunter, and that grants you +1 to advance and charge rolls, which is huge on a unit of Thunderwolves, especially if you get them set up with a nice advance and charge. It will get them to a really quite reliable turn 1 charge in a lot of situations. A little bit cheaper is the Wolfguard Battle Leader on Thunderwolf. He is just 80 points and the exact same profile except only 5 wounds, and his Storm Shield doesn't give him an extra wound, it just gives him a 4-up invuln, but still that is a fairly nice bonus to his durability. Like the Lord, he's got the same weapon options, and again, it's probably best to bring him with a Thunderhammer Storm Shield. His rules, though, are a bit different. He brings his unit lethal hits, so massively boosting the output of your Thunderwolf cavalry into tougher monsters and vehicles, and is just generally a really good boost to their attacks. And he also gets you the interesting rule of Aggressive Hunter. This is once per battle, you get to make a d6-inch move after an enemy has shot at you. You can use this to move into engagement range, but this essentially just gets you even more speed up the board to make that next turn charge more likely, or help you get onto an objective or behind cover against some other shooting the enemy may be throwing your way, or just, getting your wolves into combat to deny an enemy a charge. And that can be amazing against some armies that get a load of bonuses when they make the charge. So for me, the Lord and the Battle Leader are better picks for leading Thunderwolves, but I'm not saying Harald and Canis Wolfborn are bad. They aren't. They both bring some very good buffs to Thunderwolves, and in most armies, you will be seeing at least 2 units of Thunderwolves led by these HQs, these 4 HQs in some variety, to just bring this really durable, really fast, really aggressive threat onto the board. Back to some more infantry units now, though. The ever popular Blood Claws are up next. These are actually a bigger unit, which are all about melee combat. They cost you 140 points for 10, or you can bring 15 of them for 210 points. So it's 14 points for a toughness 4, 3-up save, 2 wound model. And they've got a really cool rule with Berserk Charge, and that gives them +1 to strength and attack when they charge. So even just set up with normal chainswords, they can be throwing out 60 strength 5 attacks on the charge from a unit of 15, which is pretty fantastic. The leader can take some options with a power fist or a power weapon, whilst up to 2 of the Blood Claws can take a special weapon if you wanted some plasma or flamers or melter. But for me, I would probably just leave them all kitted up for melee, attach a good character to them like Ragnar or Ulrik, and just charge them into the enemy, and they can do a huge amount of damage to pretty much any unit when they charge into them. Getting them advance and charge from Ragnar is obviously brilliant, but Ulrik giving them the potential rerolls hit and wound, like I said earlier, just lets them melt through pretty much anything. That squad will massively overkill even something like a toughness 9 vehicle like a Rhino or something, so they really can punch up quite aggressively into even tougher units, but anything that they go into is just going to die with that much damage going into them, that many dice being rolled against them. Grey Hunters instead are your more tactical equivalent style unit. They come in a unit of 5 for 85 points or 10 for 170, so they are 17 points each. They've got that standard Marine stat line, but these guys come with the Cunning Hunters rule, and that allows them to shoot after they've advanced or fallen back. So it's not quite as flashy as some rules, but it will allow them to get into position a bit easier and still unleash all of their firepower. They all come with a bolt gun and a bolt pistol, but they can be equipped with a chainsword as well, so they can actually do fairly okay in both melee and put some long-ranged fire support down if you've got them holding a backfield or a midfield objective. They can also take 2 special weapons, so bringing a unit of 5, they can potentially also be taking 2 melter or 2 plasma or that sort of thing. So they do have a little bit of extra output if you do need it, and I think generally they're nothing super flashy. They are essentially just Space Wolf tactical marines with a little bit more punch, thanks to being able to take the option of the chainsword. So if they do need to charge in to get into combat with something, they can do that a little bit better than regular tactical marines. The Wolf Guard are the more elite unit of the old wolves. They're still the same 85 points for 5 or 170 for 10, but they are a bit more specifically melee focused. They've got heirloom weapons, which are 4 strength 5, -1 AP, 1 damage attacks each, and then their rule chosen champions, that grants them +1 to hit when a character is with them. You can also give them all storm shields if you wanted, so you can actually turn this unit into a relatively cheap, fairly good little anvil. I mean, in general, they're okay. If I wanted a melee style unit and I wanted to use some of those older wolf units, I would probably just bring Bloodclaws, to be honest. But with their heirloom weapons and with a character attached, they can be hitting on 2s and then wounding marines on 3s, so they can at least be okay in that respect. I just don't think they really bring much that I wouldn't rather have from Bloodclaws. Another character is up next, although I'm 99% sure he will be gone with the new Codex. Lucas the Trickster is a mere 50 points, so he's one of the cheapest marine characters going. He's toughness 4, 4 wounds with a 3-up save. He can only join Bloodclaws, but he can do some fairly funny tricks for his price. Pelt of the Doppelgang rule gives him and his unit -1 to be hit, so he can really help his blob of 15 Bloodclaws stay alive as they are advancing up the board. And then his last laugh ability is a nice sort of fight on death mechanic, but instead of letting you attack, you just roll a d6 after he's been destroyed in melee, and on a 4+, the unit that killed him takes a flat d6 mortals. So it can actually be better in some situations, but at the same time, it's only on a 4+, and then it's only d6 mortals, so it could only do 1 mortal. I mean, otherwise, it could potentially do a flat 6 mortals and kill an enemy character, so it does have a lot of potential. It's just very, very swingy. In terms of his own output, he's got a plasma pistol, and then his melee weapon is the Claw of the Jackalwolf. This gives him 6 strength 5, -2 AP, 1 damage swings, so if he is with those Bloodclaws, that will be 7 strength 6 attacks instead. So it's okay, but only 1 damage means it's never going to do that much. He can be fairly scary into weaker 1 wound infantry like guardsmen or fire warriors or orc boys. He will on average kill about 4 orc boys on the charge, so that isn't actually awful when you consider he's only 50 points himself. A slightly better unit of Wolfguard is the Wolfguard Terminators. They are obviously much pricier. These ones are 185 points for 5 or 370 for 10, but that does get you the much better toughness 5, 3 wounds, and 2-up, 4-up invuln of the Terminator. They have the Wolfguard rule, which means they can ignore any weapon or ballistic skill modifiers, and they also get +1 to hit their Oath of Moment target. So most of their attacks into an oathed target will be hitting on 2s, and they are just in general a very good bodyguard unit for any of your Terminator characters. What's still really good about these that will likely change and that as a Dark Angel player annoys me immensely is they still get a brilliant selection of weapon options and loadouts. In fact, they have the best loadout selection of any Loyalist Terminator at the moment. They can still freely mix and match ranged and melee options. So you can have a couple with Thunderhammer Storm Shields to get those extra wounds, whilst you have a few heavy weapons sprinkled in like assault cannons or cyclone missile launchers. That is still an option for you. So that is very good. Otherwise, there's nothing super special about them. They are just Terminators. But if you like Terminators and you have some characters in Terminator armor that you want to put in a unit, these guys can still get you a very, very tanky squad that can still put out some decent long-range shooting. The Space Wolves also got a unique Phobos unit in the Hounds of Morkai a little while ago. They're basically your standard Reavers. They cost you 80 points for 5 or 160 points for 10. They are toughness 4, 2 wounds with a 3-up save. They do also get a cheeky 6-up invuln, which is boosted to a 4-up invuln against psychic attacks, so they can be a little bit more tanky against certain armies. They also get to scout 6 inches up the board to get, into position a bit better, but their main role is as an anti-psyker unit. Morkai's Howl lets them pick an enemy unit within 12 inches in your shooting phase, or 18 inches if they've got a Phobos lieutenant leading them, and the enemy unit must take a battle shock test, and the test is at -1 if it is a psyker unit. The enemy unit is also stunned until your next shooting phase, and what that means is it makes psychic attacks -1 to hit, so they are really quite decent at debuffing any psychic trickery the enemy may have, and they're also a little bit better at killing psykers. They've only got bolt pistol and combat knives, which don't have the best profile, but the Hounds of Morkai, theirs, have anti-psyker 4+, dev wounds, and precision. So yes, they are still not the most powerful profiles, all being 1 damage, but against psykers, they can actually be a fairly scary little threat. One of the more controversial options for the Wolves is up next. This is the Wulfen. I personally love these guys. I got them when they first came out and they were amazing. They have changed quite a lot since I ran them back in 7th when they could just one-shot a Wraith Knight. They are now much less scary in melee, but they've got a solid 8-inch move. They are toughness 5 with a 4-up save, 2 wounds and a 6-up feel no pain. So they are not especially tanky, although the 6-up feel no pain does help with that worse armor save. They cost you 95 points for 5 or 190 points for 10, so they are relatively pricey, and as I said, they are a pure melee unit. They do get to fight on death with Death Frenzy, which goes off on a 4+ after they're killed in melee, so that can be quite handy. And then where you really get to kind of grips with them is that they can swap out their base loadout of Wulfen Claws for a Wulfen Hammer and Storm Shield. And to be honest, you just do this every single time, because the Claws are 6 strength 5 attacks with -1 AP and 1 damage, whilst the Hammers are 4 attacks at strength 6, -1 AP and 2 damage. They both hit on 3s, so overall the Hammers are just better into most things, and specifically into Marines, they are just better. But on top of that, taking the Hammer and Storm Shield, that gets you a 4-up invuln as part of the deal. So for me, it is just an easy swap. The Hammer and Shield combo is just 90% of the time better output, and it's more durability. So I would run that every single time, that particular loadout, unless you know you are only going up against 1 wound infantry where the Claws may be slightly better. Now, however, we move on to a few of the tankier units in the index. The Wulfen Dreadnought is a bit of a beast. It's got a 8-inch move, toughness 9, 2-up save and 8 wounds. It's also got a very useful 6-up feel no pain, and it costs you 130 points, which really isn't that expensive for what it can do. Its ability Bestial Rage lets it do some mortals, so you roll a dice and you get to add 2 to the result if you've charged, and you do D3 mortals on a 4 to 5, and D3 plus 3 mortals on a 6. So essentially, after you've charged on a 4+, you can be doing D3 plus 3 mortal wounds into an enemy, which is quite spicy. The Dreadnought comes with a Fenrisian Axe and a Great Wolf Claw, but you can swap either of them for a Blizzard Shield, which again I would always do. It gives you a brilliant 4-up invulnerable save on the model. Now the Wolf Claw is 5 strength 10 -3 AP 3 damage swings, whilst the Axe is either 5 strength 10 -2 AP d6 plus 1 damage attacks, or 10 strength 6 -2 AP 1 damage. So for me, unless you know you're going into only Terminators or other 3 wound infantry, the Axe is just generally better. It's better into tougher vehicles thanks to the d6 plus 1 damage. it's better into weaker chaff thanks to the 10 attacks from the sweep profile, so I would always swap the claw out for the shield and just run it with an axe and shield, as this super durable, fairly fast distraction Carnifex, they can take a lot of damage before they go down. And believe me, I fired a Kratos as well as 2 of the Marine Storm Speeders into it, and I think I did like 1 or 2 wounds into it. They can be very, very tanky. If you want something that is just more pure slaughter, then Murderfang may be a better pick. This is pricier at 170 points, but Murderfang can just be brutal. It's the same toughness 9, 2-up save, 8 wound profile with the 6-up feel no pain, but the Murderfang has got the murder claws, which it uses to murder stuff with. 8 attacks at strength 14, minus 2 AP, 3 damage, and twin linked means that this thing will easily kill about 2 to 3 Terminators in one go in melee, which is okay. I mean, it's nothing super terrifying, I'll admit, but the real power of this guy is in the rule Murder Maker, and this means that after an enemy has shot or fought into him, he can either shoot or fight as if it were the fight phase. So the trick with this is you charge this guy into combat, you kill an enemy, and he can then potentially pile into another enemy unit, and when you do that, that other enemy unit has to fight him. So he can be fought into. If he survives, he of course gets to fight back again. And then if he kills that second unit, he can pile in, or consolidate should I say, again into another enemy unit who have to fight him. So he can daisy chain his way through the enemy battle line, and if your opponent has deployed badly or set up badly and they've got a load of units close together that he can easily kill, he can get a good 2 or 3 activations in a single phase and just rip through a load of smaller units and create this entire wave of destruction in the enemy battle lines. It is a really good ability, and I mean, yes, it won't always happen if your opponent spreads out well so you can't consolidate into another unit or plans around it and knows what Murderfang can do. It can be quite easy to counter, but this, in theory, can let him kill a solid few units in a single combat phase if you're lucky, so he is just a massive threat that your enemy really will have to deal with as soon as possible, or they just risk him running rampant through their backfield. I won't dwell on the next unit too long because we have done a whole video on the Thunderwolves, but they are still brilliant. They got a slight increase, but they are now 120 points for 3 or 240 points for 6, and that gets you a toughness 6, 4 wound body with a 10-inch move, a 3-up save, and 99.9% of the time a 4-up invuln, because you will basically always be bringing the Storm Shield option. They have 4 strength 5, minus 1 AP, 1 damage attacks from the Rider, and then the same 3 strength 5, minus 1 AP, 1 damage attacks from the Claws and Teeth. But on the charge, they get plus 1 damage to their weapons, so getting you up to 7 2 damage attacks from each model, which is really quite impressive. They are just in general super fast, super tanky, and can be really dangerous in combat, especially when they get the charge. They also get some brilliant buffs from the combination of characters and HQs that can join them, as we saw, and they are just all round a key linchpin unit for a lot of lists. They can get where you need them really fast, they can either kill or at the very least lock up most enemy units for most of the game, and as I said, on the charge, they are actually very efficient at killing anything from chaff to marines to lighter vehicles. They are just all round a brilliant unit for the wolves. If instead of killing chaff you want some chaff of your own, the Fenrisian wolves also offer that. Toughness 4, 1 wound and a 6-up save, so they are very flimsy, but they are also super cheap at just 30 points for 5. You can instead go for 10 of them at 60 points, and with the 10-inch move they can get where you need them very easily. They do get to advance and charge with their Swift Hunters rule, which is of course handy, but even just bringing a few units of 5 gets you a couple of very handy squads to screen out deep strikers, protect your more valuable units from enemy charges, and just generally be an annoyance to your opponent. So they are incredibly useful for such a low cost, and if you've got a spare 30 points in your list and can't decide what to bring, adding a unit of these in can pay dividends. Now we're back to some of the older non-Primaris units. Skyclaws are blood claws with jump packs, essentially. The same toughness 4, 3-up save, 2 wound profile, but now with a 12-inch move. They are 90 points for 5, or 165 points for 10, or again you can go up to 15 and that costs you 240 points. They do get to reroll charge rolls, and they also get +1 to hit on the charge with their headstrong rule. Just bringing a full unit of 15 with chainswords, that can net you a very tasty 45 attacks, hitting on 2s on the charge, and that can definitely do some work as a fast moving screen clearing unit, and even against tougher targets like we saw with the regular Bloodclaws, just that weight of dice will put in some work over the course of a game. Longfangs, by comparison, are your version of Devastators. They cost you 120 points for 5 or 145 points for 6. Those are their 2 squad options. They've got a few rules, but they are essentially the same as Marine Devastators. You get a Cherub for that 1 auto 6 to hit per battle, and then Fire Discipline allows them to reroll hit rolls of 1 if they've stayed still and if they have a Longfang pack leader in the squad. So they can be fairly reliable with their accuracy. Like Devastators, they can bring a choice of missile launchers, las cannons, multi-melters, grav cannons, and that sort of thing. And if you bring a unit of 6 for 145 points and have that pack leader attached, you can get 5 heavy weapons from the Longfangs themselves, so that can be fairly potent. 5 of their las cannons will get them around 9 wounds onto an enemy gladiator tank, so using the Cherub or having the pack leader's weapons also firing in, that can pretty much guarantee them a kill shot on an enemy tank in a single shooting phase. So they can actually punch up quite well for their cost. They are still also cheap enough to not really worry too much if they do get shot off the board straight afterwards. So I'm quite a fan of the Longfangs. I think they are fairly decent. I think they do some good output. And I think specifically if you want to run some of those older Wolf units, they can still hold their own. Now we're on to the Wolf Flyers. As always, these won't be seen much because they are just too pricey for what they do at the moment. The Stormfang gunship is a whopping 300 points, so it's more than a Land Raider. And whilst it does have an enviable stat line of toughness 10, 14 wounds and a 3-up save, as well as a small transport capacity, it is still just so expensive. Frozen Prey is its datasheet rule, letting you pick a monster or a vehicle that was shot by this unit's Hellfrost Destructor, and until the end of the enemy's next turn, that unit has -2 to move, advance, and charge rolls. So that is actually a really great little debuff, don't get me wrong. Unfortunately, I just don't think it's enough to warrant that cost. And I mean, the output in terms of the damage from this unit is okay. You get 2 Skyhammer missile launchers, which are 3 strength 8, -1 AP, D3 damage shots each. A twin Storm Strike missile launcher for 1 extra strength 10, -2 AP, 3 damage shots. And then of course you get the Hellfrost Destructor, which is D3 strength 11, -3 AP, 7 damage shots with sustained hits D3, or D6 +6 strength 8, -1 AP, 2 damage shots with Torrent. Now don't get me wrong, 7 damage sounds amazing, I won't lie to you, but D3 shots is still an issue, and against really tough targets like Imperial Knights, you're still going to be wounding on 5s thanks to it being strength 11, so it does sound scary and it does have some good rules. I just personally don't think it's 300 points good. The Stormwolf is cheaper at 250 points. This is more of a dedicated transport. It's got a capacity of 16 rather than just 6, but obviously it does have less ranged output to make up for that. It does have the Land Raider-esque rule of being able to charge after disembarking, which is called Into the Foe. So it can be relatively spicy with a 20-inch move, but the output is, as I said, only mediocre. Again, it's got the 2 Skyhammer missile launchers, and it's got a twin las cannon, and then it has a twin Hellfrost cannon, which is, to be honest, quite a lot worse than the Destructor. Strength 9, -3 AP and 5 damage on the focus shot, and then D6 strength 6 shots on the dispersed. They are both twin linked, which does help, and if you really need a unit to get way across the board and still go for a charge, I could see this one being used, but again, it just feels a tad pricey for 250 points, especially when you compare it to, say, a Land Raider, which is 10 points cheaper. The final few units for the Wolves come in the form of a selection of pack leader loadouts. You can take a pack leader in power armor, which costs you just 30 points and brings your unit the ability to reroll battle shock tests, as well as a decent selection of weapons as you would expect. The pack leader with jump pack is a tiny bit pricier at 35 points, but brings the same inspiring leader buff of a battle shock reroll. And then the pack leader in Terminator armor, he's the priciest at 40 points, but they are all the same otherwise in terms of rules. They can't be your warlord, and they are essentially just an extra character you can attach to a unit alongside another character. What I really like about the Terminator one, as we kind of hinted at in the Longfang part of this video, is that they can join units like Bloodclaws, Grey Hunters, or Longfangs. So he can actually be a really cool unit to join one of those just to bring some extra output for them. And for 40 points, I may be tempted to bring a pack leader with a Cyclone missile launcher to some Longfangs to get them the reroll of hit rolls of 1 that they get when he's joined, and also add 2 extra missile shots to their shooting. You also get an Iron Priest, who is your Tech Marine style unit. Toughness 4, 4 wounds with a 2-up save. He does cost you 60 points, but he does have some okay shooting with a Strength 6, -3 AP, 3 damage Hellfrost pistol, and then 3 Strength 8, -2 AP, 3 damage swings from his Tempest Hammer, on top of the 1 servo arm attack he has at the same profile. Like a Tech Marine, he gets Lone Operative if he's within 3 inches of a vehicle, and also like a Tech Marine, he can heal up friendly vehicles in your command phase. So he can bring back D3 wounds on 1, and also give it +1 to hit for the turn. His final little rule is that he gets quite a nice buff to his hammer. If a vehicle is destroyed near him, he gets bumped up to 6 attacks, which means on average in melee he will quite reliably kill a Terminator with that profile at 6 attacks. So he does quite a bit. He is okay, I think, for 60 points. The Cyberwolf is the HQ Wolf for your Fenrisian Wolves. It's 20 points for a Toughness 4, 6-up save, 2 wound unit with a 6-up invuln and a 10-inch move. It basically just brings the unit it joins a 6-inch scout move with Alpha Hunter, and also +1 to hit and wound for it if the enemy unit is fighting is below half strength. It's not great. To be honest, I would rather just bring a unit of 5 Fenrisian Wolves for 30 points, but if you need to get a unit of Wolves that 6-inch scout, you are essentially paying 20 points for that. So you can in some situations think of this as just a 20-point enhancement for them, really. So if you really need that, you could just throw this guy into that unit. Your own version of the Scouts are the Wolf Scouts, 80 points for 5 or 160 points for 10. They've only got a 4-up save, but the usual Toughness 4 and 2 wounds. They've got Infiltrators and the Scouts 6-inch rule, which does help them get where they need to on the battlefield, and like regular Scouts, they can do uppy-downy tricks with guerrilla tactics. Aside from that, they're fairly standard. They've got a decent selection of weapons, although they can't take a sniper rifle like normal Scouts. Instead, you can make them a bit more melee-focused with some melee options on the Scout Pack Leader, and of course you can take 1 heavy weapon, so if you wanted a unit of 5 and a missile launcher, for instance, you could do that. They're okay. I mean, they're nothing special. To be honest, I think if you want to bring Scouts, just take the regular Codex Marine Scouts because they are just 10 points cheaper and they do pretty much everything the same. The final unit for the Wolves is the Venerable Dreadnought. This guy is 155 points, so he's a bit pricier than the Wulfen version. He doesn't have the 6-up Feel No Pain, but is otherwise the same Toughness 9, 2-up save and 8 wounds. This one only has a 6-inch move though, which does kind of suck, and it basically works as a bit of a force multiplier for your army. It gives you reroll hit and wound rolls of 1 for an infantry unit that is within 6 inches of it, thanks to Wisdom of the Ancients. So that's nice, but otherwise it can just take your regular loadout of ranged or melee options, las cannons, missile launchers, or it can take the Great Axe and Blizzard Shield combo. I would say it's not quite as good a distraction kind of effects as the Wulfen variant, so unless you really need those rerolls on a few infantry units walking up around it, I probably wouldn't be looking at this guy. But if you want to avoid those annoying ones, he does bring a little bit of reliability to your army. And that is the Space Wolves. They do have a lot of data sheets, don't get me wrong, and whilst I expect a lot of them will be pruned in the upcoming Codex, they do still have a good bit of choice for now. So whether you wanted to go all in on their unique unit, or just sprinkle a few in here or there, they really can be kitted out to do almost exactly what you need. And of course, they've got that very strong detachment rule with the Champions of Russ, great character support. So I think in general, the Wolves are in a pretty good place at the moment. But as always, what do you make of the Sons of Russ? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me. But until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.